estimated cost of $315 billion for Donald Trump's signature campaign pledge is astounding.
The largest domestic deportation operation in American history.
Even with more conservative estimates, it is still huge. One group estimates it at $162 billion, which is more than the government spent on the majority of federal agencies in the fiscal year 2024. This explains why an operation of this magnitude could cost hundreds of billions of dollars over a decade. Is deportation your plan?
Is it your plan to deport everyone who is here illegally over the next 4 years?
Well, I think you have to do it, and it's a very tough thing to do.
His indicates that around 13 million illegal immigrants are at risk of deportation, approximately 4% of the U.S. population. To put that into perspective, the total number of individuals incarcerated in U.S. jails and prisons in 2022 was approximately 1.9 million.
Scale is difficult for the government to carry out.
Erin Reen Melnick is a senior fellow at the American Immigration Council, a liberal immigration organization. And it was through her that I met Dave, and even though he came from Erin's school,
Trump would have to do more than quadruple current ICE removals of people arrested in the interior just to hit the levels that we've seen previously under Obama.
I think that you take a sequential approach to it. You start with what's achievable. Let's start with 1 million.
The specifics of the plan are still being worked out, but if Trump decides to deport 1 million people annually, it could still cost roughly $88 billion per year and take 11 years, according to one estimate, assuming 20% of people would leave on their own.
Yes, it's expensive, but the trade-offs, I think, are well worth it.
Ron Vitiello oversaw the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, also known as ICE, for a year during President Trump's first term.
Now the government is underfunded for its ability to detain people. To be able to accomplish this and the border mission simultaneously will require a reallocation, if not an infusion for resources.
Other immigration experts say the actual cost of Trump's mass deportation plan will be much lower than the American Immigration Council's estimate of $315 billion.
More robust enforcement like the administration is contemplating may create significant economies of scale.
Stephen Camarota is the center's director of research. The group, which supports immigration studies and advocates for immigration limitations, benefited from staff appointments during Trump's first term.
Start doing it and you get an infrastructure in place, then it might be a lot cheaper.
The first step in the deportation process is an arrest.
A targeted arrest. We'll know who we're going to arrest, where we're most likely to find them based on numerous investigative processes.
We're starting with the criminals, and we got to do it. And then we're starting with others.
Trump claims that anyone who entered the country illegally, as minors or dreamers, may be exempt from arrests. ICE officers would either travel to a person's home or identify someone who was already in jail or prison. Police, please come to the door.
The majority of undocumented immigrants are not in law enforcement custody. Most of them have never committed any offenses.
Arresting individuals in the neighborhood, also referred to as mass arrests, is not a typical strategy for ICE. Vitiello claims that although it is more costly and logistically complex, it is at the core of the Trump administration's strategy.
I'm not concerned that they won't be able to find them. It's just a matter of time, given the circumstances, given the availability of information, and given the resources in play.
ICE officers typically do not have warrants. Therefore, large-scale arrests often take several days and involve numerous federal agents.
Immigration violations are not criminal, which means that a judicial warrant to arrest them would not have probable cause. They might have to wait hours for the person to leave their house. They might have to stake out a work site.
The American Immigration Council believes that in order to execute arrests on this scale, more than 300 additional law enforcement officers would be required. It is the largest law enforcement officers in the country, with enforcement officers and employees calling the number exaggerated. Vitiello of the federal government indicated that state and local law enforcement might be directed by task forces to assist with at-large arrests, which they currently do.
Having that referral system, having state and locals help ICE officers do their job. Better to have it than not, but not definitive in whether they do the work or not.
When this section is in place, keeping someone in ICE custody costs about $200 per day, which is the most expensive aspect of the entire process. Congress has allocated sufficient funds for at least 4,000, 500 detention beds in fiscal year 2025, but according to the American Immigration Council, it is not nearly enough to imprison 1 million individuals annually for 11 years. Soft-sided facilities would need to be constructed at 216 locations annually for 11 years. Temporary soft-sided facilities are available near the border with tent-like structures traditionally used for this purpose. These would place anyone who was not physically imprisoned under electronic surveillance, which costs $4.55 per person per year.
Contractors drive people in between ICE detention centers or drive the vans after somebody's arrested.
Every project involves private contractors. Step of the detention procedure could further increase costs.
I want to be breaking up families, so the only way you don't break up the family is you keep them together and you have to send them all back.
Family detention is the most expensive kind of detention because the US government is required to give people minimum standards, and those children need to have child welfare professionals on site. They need to have pediatricians on site. There needs to be a provision for them to get schooling if they are going to be held for months or potentially years at a time.
Additionally, keeping kids in custody would increase the cost of this procedure. Vitello states that the government might cut expenses by repurposing existing detention facilities such as Guantanamo Bay.
A country like a Panama, potentially Mexico, could agree to hold third country nationals so that their due process could be adjudicated, thereby lowering the costs and kind of sending a message down the pipeline that people are not going to be released into the United States to await those adjudications. That alone will reduce the number of individuals trying to cross the border illegally.
According to Camarota, more than 1 million individuals might be imprisoned at a significantly lower cost.
They're people with a final order of removal that we just never made leave. Those individuals shouldn't have to be held long. We can get them out very quickly.
Legal processing follows detention, which immigration law experts claim is the largest bottleneck in the bulk deportation process. Over 1,100 more courtrooms and almost 2,000 more immigration judges would be needed to handle 6 million cases.
There is not only a cost in the immigration court side, but there's also a cost in the ICE side in getting these new prosecutors online. You need support staff for the judges, judicial law clerks, secretaries.
Staffing on both sides causes each case to cost above $2,500 for speedy courtroom setup. The government will likely erect tent courts similar to those used in 2019 in order to implement the migrant protection protocols. When illegal immigrants residing in the U.S. were sent back to Mexico to await their court proceedings, they went to tent courts near the border to make virtual appearances before judges.
You could do those hearings much faster, logistically get more judges and more hearings heard in a day.
As with finding new efficiencies in the detention space, that is another thing that has its limits.
In Laredo, Texas, tent-style courtrooms cost roughly $16 million to construct and $143 million a year to run after a removal. After receiving a final removal order, the individual must either wait in jail until deportation or report for deportation at a later time.
At that point, the US government has to actually arrange the removal. That would involve putting them on a bus and sending them to Mexico, but if they're from any other country other than Canada, that means putting them on a plane and flying them to their ultimate destination.
On this scale, more than 6,000 removal flights would be required annually. For comparison, the average ICE removal flight in 2023 cost over $117,000 per hour, compared to about 1,000 removal flights in fiscal year 2023. This number could increase if private contractors who provide ICE with planes and pilots raise their charges.
There are other assets, right? ICE has a number of its own aircraft that are already in service today. The Justice Department, the Marshal Service, has their own transportation aircraft. The scale-up need could come from the military.
In November, Trump told NBC News that his plan has no price tag. Camarota claims that as it would be impractical to deport even 1 million people annually, let alone all 13 million in a single one-time operation, the cost will probably be spread over a number of years.
In this case, it's probably hyperbole. What I think he's trying to do is tell everyone, when I take over, the immigration law is going to be back in business. And I think it's going to have a big effect, and then it's going to be up to the public to judge whether he kept his word.
However, obtaining sufficient financing from Congress will be essential for a project of this magnitude. According to Senate Republicans, approving a border funding measure will be their top priority in the upcoming year.
Border security, more bed spaces so you don't have to release people that shouldn't be released, and more ICE agents to deport people who represent a threat to our country and shouldn't be here to begin with.
Next term, Republicans will control both chambers of Congress, but their majority will prevent them from spending this much. There is no assurance.
To my Democratic friends, I think if you resist rational deportation policy, you do so at your own peril.